There you go.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Bruce Woolley. I'm the APMM Communications VP. And our speaker presenter today is Brad Elliott, who works as a property master for picture movies and film and TV. And he is a member of the Property Masters Guild, which is their version of the APMM that started, I think, in 2012.
Possibly, but it really hasn't gotten active until just the last couple of years.
Okay, yeah. I cleverly noticed that and then didn't write down the exact year. It might have been 2017, but either way, it's been around for a little while. And we would like Brad to maybe talk about himself and what he does, and a little bit about the Property Masters Guild itself and how that got started and how you run things. And if you run out of things to talk about, I have many questions, and anyone else can ask questions too. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brad. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me, and please do jump in. We can do a lot of conversational start stops. I want to make sure that there's a ton of value for you guys. Quick introduction to myself. I actually started before I started in the film industry. I thought that I wanted to be a model maker because I grew up watching so many amazing Star Wars and Battlestar and all the I was just transported by all the Star Treks and all the things and the ships in Aliens, and all that stuff were just so cool to me. And the fact that miniatures existed to even do moonscapes and stuff was just, that was where I was going to be. I was always a maker. I actually, right out of college, came out to Los Angeles with a tent and about $50 with the intent on and a few models that I'd made along the way that were kit bash kind of things that I thought might be interesting, and wanted to tour all the special effects houses and model shops out here that would meet with me. And I met with a great deal of people, and they said, yeah, your stuff is pretty good, but if you want to get a job out here, you have to move out here first. So I had a job waiting for me back in Madison, where I just finished school, and I decided to delay my LA model making career and pick up that job, which I did for a few years, and it was a lot of fun. And then found myself back in Los Angeles, really passing through, but I saw that there was going to be a new Muppet show. This was in 1995. They were going to be making Muppets Tonight, and I was like, oh, well, I'll just go get a job on that. So I found the number for Henson Productions and made a phone call and got a job as a PA. And over the first 3 months of making photocopies and getting coffee and washing cars and doing tape runs at the end of the day and all those amazingly glamorous jobs, I had constantly walked through the Muppet Workshop, and they were just so many cool things in there that that's where they make the puppets, that's where they made the costumes, and that's where they made the props. And that's what just caught my eye. And I volunteered in all of my spare time as a PA to hey, can I help? I'll take out trash in here if you need. I know which end of a screwdriver to use, and eventually, can you use this jigsaw and cut the bottom out of this pot so that when we put it on the set on the stove, we can have a turkey pop out of it and look around, and make it so that we can puppeteer with it. I had a few of those chances, and I kept succeeding. And one day I got a call to come in on a Saturday. They said, we can't pay you anything else, but we need some help building. They changed a scene and pulled it up, and we need some guns for our rats. And so in one day I was able to make a couple of M1 rifles, 4 grenades, and a pair of binoculars for the rat puppets. And the M1 rifles, you could actually plug a little non-gun squib into the front of them, and with a battery pack and a button on the rod that the puppeteer would use to control the hand, you could push a button and it would fire that squib, so you could actually shoot these guns. And that was enough that when we went into hiatus, I got a job offer to sit down at a workbench in the Muppet Workshop and start building props. So from PA to prop maker in the Muppet Workshop in 3 months, which was just it's it's unfair that I got such an easy ride into that, but I stayed a prop maker for a very long time until I realized that it was a super toxic world. I was working at a prop house after the Muppet Show and just doing a lot of, catalyzed paints and a lot of making silicone molds, which isn't that bad, but then casting all kinds of different resins. And when an opportunity came up to be an assistant prop master on an old show called Mr. Show with Bob and David, I jumped on that and did a season as an assistant, and then the next season the prop master left, and then I became a prop master. So I've been doing that ever since, but I've always had a hand in building, and I've stayed a maker the whole time. In fact, the last project I just finished, fast forward from 1995 to now, was Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder's new. There's two movies that we did back to back. And even there, we got behind the eight ball in a couple of places, and I couldn't find somebody to make holsters. So I decided, like, okay, well, it's time to learn how to work leather and wet form and do all the embossing and all that stuff. So even as prop master, I was able to find a little time to get my hands dirty and do some making. So along the way, I've had a ton of cool experience. The puppets have led to other puppets. Team America World Police was obviously a puppet show that some folks might know, and tons more. And I stayed with the Muppets on and off throughout my entire career. In fact, I was only had to say no to doing Muppets Mayhem, the latest show, because I was committed to Rebel Moon. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. I know that, and please jump in whenever you want, but there are many different ways we use in the film industry model makers. And if you want me to get into that a little bit, I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, for sure.
So not only like for Team America World Police, for example, everything had to be built to scale. And, not every prop maker is going to be good at miniatures. Many of them are, but an example that I can show you that's right over here is we had a character named Spotswood, and he had a Scotch glass. And so this is, a turned and machined piece of acrylic that's yellowing a little now because of age, and I haven't taken as good a care of it as I could have. But this takes a very particular skill set to build something that mimics crystal, and we could put it in his hand, and that's how he would have his drinks. We had a lot of guns, obviously. Here's a little remnant of I don't know if you can see this very well because it's black on black. Here, let me
Yeah,
help
we can
out.
see it.
Oh, yeah, it's bullets in a bandolier. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like they're floppy. They articulate, they flip around, and they're also incredibly lightweight because puppets, especially marionettes, can't be weighed down. Because when you have something heavy, either on a rod with a puppet or on a string, it has inertia, right? Like everything in the world. So when you move it, you don't want it swinging forever because it should settle quickly. And also, the more weight you put into that puppet, just the harder it is to puppeteer. So those are a couple of examples of how it was important to have people that understood model making to be prop makers in those cases. There are other ways that we utilize models. I was lucky enough to be the prop master on a performance capture film called Tintin, based on the old books by Hergé. It was Peter Jackson and Steven Spielberg co-directing, which is a really interesting story in and of itself, to have two director giants kind of sharing that job. But one of the things that Steven would do is he would have the art department build models of the virtual sets, right? These sets are all digital. We build representations of them as much as we need on set, but so that he could visually get an idea of where his shots were going to be. There were models built at probably roughly maybe a 10th scale. And he would take a lipstick camera and just kind of sit for a little while with each of those models and put that little camera in those sets to sort of figure out where his angles would be, where his blocking would be, so that on the day in the volume, and I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole because I can go there for a while, he would understand how to communicate to the art department what parts of those sets needed to have representation, so that if a character is going to get slammed up against a wall, there's a wall there to get slammed up against. We don't have to build the whole set because it's always going to exist virtually. But without those models, he would never have been able to really define and figure out his shot list and get his storyboards together because he didn't really understand the space. That's sort of how he was able to do his director's scout of his sets that were never going to be built practically, but he still had to get to the regular process of filmmaking, which is to go and scout the location. And that's how he would do that scout. Similarly, like fast forwarding all the way to Rebel Moon, I didn't employ them, but there were model makers brought in so that we could understand how the sets would look from a wide perspective in 3D. So for example, and I can't talk about this movie much, but certain environments, let's say, were quite large, and we needed to understand the relationship between all the buildings that were going to be put into that space. So models were created so that we could, in a small scale, realize where this was going to be, how big the set was going to be. And Zack Snyder can look at these things and say, oh, well, I'm not going to have enough room for this. We need more set over here. And so it's a very useful tool. Even if the fidelity at that level isn't 1-to-1, it's a very useful tool so that he can sort of map out his geography and figure out if he has enough room to put his cast in there, to put his background in there. And also for scale. It's a science fiction film where there are where it's not just human actors. There are some creatures involved as well. And I'm not even going to go so far as to tell you what's available if you go look at the trailer. But there are creatures, and sometimes you have to figure out, okay, well, how big are these? Because my job is I've got to create things that interact with these creatures. And so in conjunction with the visual effects team, we have to know where the creature is going to stop practically and start digitally, what kind of representations they need on set so that they can achieve what they have down the pipeline in VFX. So in one case, we had to, we got a 3D STL of one of these creatures, and we printed it at 5 different scales. And then we put those next to a little model of a human and said, how big is this creature if this is the size of a person, if that makes sense. So we got I think a 1/12 scale figure, and then printed the critter out in 5 different scales. And Zach could go like, oh, well, this one's too small. That one's obviously too big. Let's take the second largest or whatever. And that then informs the entire department, whether it's, or the entire show, whether it's the art department that has to build an enclosure for it, or the prop department that has to build a harness for it, or the visual effects department that has to understand how big it needs to be and how we're going to achieve, how they're going to achieve their goals down pipeline. And also the stunt department to figure out how are they going to simulate this with, and the effects department, how are they going to simulate this when an actor has to be interacting with it. So those are critical pieces that we use all the time moving forward, you know, in trying to get a project off the ground. I do have a model from Kenobi that has an interesting story. I don't know how many people remember Star Wars: A New Hope, when Luke is in his garage and 3PO is coming up out of his oil bath. Luke is kind of like chilling in a reclining seat, and he's playing with a little spaceship, a T-16. That becomes a story point in Kenobi later on, where Obi-Wan buys this junked, busted up toy from a Jawa, and over the course of the series he cleans it up and then eventually gives it to Luke. This is the, I hope not to drop it, this was the gift that I was given from our director and executive producer, which is the actual T-16 that Ewan McGregor handed to young Luke on the set. And this is an example of such an amazing level of detail in this model. And I don't know if you guys know the story of it in A New Hope, but what I love about this thing is that Luke talks about it'll be easy. It's like, you know, bullseyeing womp rats in my T16 back home, right? In an early draft, or not maybe not even early draft, but in a draft of the script, you were actually going to be watching Luke fly Beggar's Canyon as almost like a precursor to when he's in the trench on the Death Star, and he was going to be flying in a T16, and he was going to basically mimic everything that happens later, almost like he's been training for this in Beggar's Canyon. And so production got so far as to ILM back then, a bunch of guys in a garage in Van Nuys, actually built this model to be the on-camera model that they were going to use, like they would do the X-Wings and the TIE fighters and the Millennium Falcon and all that. So the level of detail on this is far beyond what a toy would be like in Luke's garage. But they had cut that scene as a visual effects scene early on, and they still had the model. And so the set dressing, it just became useful as set dressing, because why not? We have it. It's a spaceship. Luke's kind of a kid. He can have a toy to fly around. And if you notice, when he sets it down, he's like, oh, I'm never going to get out of here. And he sets it down a little roughly on a table. And if you notice, it breaks because it's a model meant to be photographed on blue. And
Camel.
And yeah, so he decided they decided to use it, but it breaks on camera, and it's a little there are a few flubs in Star Wars. Obviously, you know, Bruce, you're wearing the gear, you're flying the flag. I appreciate that. But that's another example of like amazing model work. And to recreate this, I actually called Weta Workshop, because I have a very good relationship with the folks down there. And they had somebody on staff in their prop making department who is a huge Star Wars fan. And I had enough lead time for them that over the course of a few months, they could source even the original model kits that they kit bashed to build the actual model. And with my access to the Lucasfilm archives, I was able to get, you know, probably 30, 40 high-res photos of the original model. They wouldn't let me take it to copy it, but I could get, you know, people in white gloves to go out and measure every single aspect. So this particular T16 is as good as it gets as far as a reproduction of the original, which I was quite proud to bring to set, to make sure that it, you know, this is one of those things that you can't screw up. Star Wars fans are fantastic. I count myself among them. And what a Star Wars fan wants is new content, but don't you dare change anything. So that was one of the challenges there. But another use of where a model that was built for one purpose in 1970, probably 5 when it was built, was used in the film in a different purpose, as an on-camera piece in a hand, as opposed to represent the actual ship. And then years later, in 2021, I would guess, when we were making this thing, maybe it was that right? Yeah, it might be. Right out of the COVID break. It's a callback to that, and now we get the origin story of how that particular prop now gets to Luke, which is really fun. So it's a neat arc and it's an incidental arc, but it's a neat arc for another type of model that we use in the film industry.
Let me sneak in really quickly and say, on the Property Masters Guild website, they have a few stories like that, and one of them is of the Infinity Gauntlet, which was I guess almost a throwaway piece in one of the Thor movies in the background in a room. And then they said, all right, well, now we need that Infinity Gauntlet to be a major plot element. Well, they made it for the wrong hand compared to the comic and everything else. So they had to go and recreate that kind of from the model that someone just quick slap something together and shove it in the corner. It's going to be in the background of filming and not do anything in this movie. But I don't think they even knew it was going to be used again. The people,
I have to say that Kevin Feige did something with Marvel that was really amazing, in that he was able to he had the long view on where they were going. So he may even have known that this gauntlet was going to become a big deal later, but probably didn't know what the design was actually going to be. It was a background piece, but like, let's throw it in there. Let's put it there and plant that little Easter egg so that later on, if it gets found, it's there. And I think people who really like to do deep dives on these projects and these films, you know, that really want to maybe sort of luxuriate in the world of these projects a little bit, that's important to them. That pays off quite a bit. And so I didn't know that. I'm glad to hear it. That's a cool thing, you know.
Oh, go check. There's lots of stories like that and interesting details. Another one is how many things they made for the Jurassic World park. Like they did everything that Disneyland has: brochures,
Yeah,
strollers, handbags, shoulder bags, drinking cups with dinosaur
Lunch
lids.
boxes,
yeah,
all
Yeah,
all
and
of
they had
it.
it all sitting there and just almost throwaway stuff, half of it. And of course they were able to sell it later, but in
Yeah,
the movie they're just walking around holding stuff and
yep.
bringing it around and being careless with it, and it's all models.
And
Bob's
with
prop
that,
department.
the ones in the front of the shelf will probably be of a different resolution and quality as the one behind it. Because even though that's Spielberg, the budgets are always, it's all budget now. I actually just did a 2 days of interviews with a couple of actually 4 prop masters who are sort of legendary folks. Like I'm talking about the prop master that did Patton, the prop master that did Edward Scissorhands, the prop master that did The Sting, you know, the guy that worked as an assistant prop master on Jaws at the beginning of his career. And back then, from talking to these folks, the industry used to be about this many creatives and about this many accountants. And the script has sort of flipped on that. And now when you get to a production, there are this many creatives and there are this many accountants. It's so much more of a business than it was. Back then, it seemed like, yes, movies make money. We'll make money. Let's go make this movie. And you put out your initial budget, but everything that's changed, it's like, yeah, okay, no problem. Director wants it, we'll get it. George C. Scott wants that, we'll get that. Don't worry about it. And there was always money that they could find. And now it's different. If we're going over budget because something came up that wasn't on the page, because we can only really budget the page and then pad a little bit more. If there's something that shows up on the page nowadays, it's you got to go to the producer and you got to go, well, here's the thing. This is going to be $15,000 to make this. And I'm not even sure it's a prop. I'm happy to make it for you, but I didn't budget for this. So how are we going to pay for it? And those are unfortunately conversations that my generation and the folks coming up behind me have to deal with more and more. And the folks that really set the foundation for the film industry are not so beholden to. They seem to get a little bit more of what they needed when they needed it.
So I know a few of our viewers. I'm sorry.
No, go, please. I've talked already for a half an hour, and I apologize. I'm good at just running my mouth. So please ask as many questions as you'd like.
Well, if we run out of time, I'm sure there's enough material here to have a whole nother meetup again, part 2.
Be
There
happy
you
to.
go.
But and we could do that in December. But for now, I know that a lot of people are really interested in learning. If they work for themselves, they work for a shop, and they would like to get some of that sweet, sweet Hollywood money. How do they make themselves known to people like you, or the other people that would have to know about them?
Yeah. So there's sort of, I don't generally hire people who are just model makers. On Team America, I did go out and find people who were very specific to miniatures, but most of what we hire internally are prop makers. That's somebody that is a jack of all trade and sort of a master of some. The way I structure a bigger project like Rebel Moon, for example, where we have more than a dozen different environments that have their own technology, I lean heavily on outside shops to build. So there are union shops in Los Angeles, and but I don't limit myself to Los Angeles. As you know, I reached out to What a Workshop there in New Zealand. The other side is I always have a little shop myself. You go out to the shops that are in town, they're the professional shops, like Studio Art and Technology is one of them. Thingergy is another one of them. Hand Prop Room in town is another one of them. And those are the three big union shops. And I'm in the Prop Masters Guild. That is a non-union affiliated guild. But I'm also a member of Local 44, which is the union. So when the local shops fill up their bandwidth and they start saying, I'm sorry, no, I can't make that schedule, or we're full of other projects right now, that's where I sort of, the door opens for me to reach out to somebody like Weta Workshop out of the country to do things that everybody here is saying no to. In addition to using outside shops, and I know I'm going a long way around to get to your answer, but I promise I'll get there. I hire a local team. On Rebel Moon, I had a union painter and 2 union prop makers in a shop that we tool up with a modest amount of our own tooling, 3D printers, bandsaws, drill presses, spray booth, all that kind of stuff. And those folks allow someone like me to be very nimble and be able to do very quick light manufacturing that just came up, or do repairs, or do an aging pass in paint on something that came from a shop that's not quite right, that needs to be finished a little bit. So if somebody is interested in getting into this world, those are 2 doors that are sort of open. You can either go into the world of the shops where you have, kind of full-time employment and they move from project to project, whatever comes through the door. Or if you can get into the union as a prop maker, then I can hire for the shop that is crewed up locally. Josh Roth is a prop master whose name you might not recognize, but who did The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka, among other things. He, on those Star Wars shows, chose to lean much more heavily into his own manufacturing shop. So brought in tons of prop makers and model makers, way more than the 3 that I had as my core on Rebel Moon. And in fact, I probably would have gone more in that direction had all of the really good people not already been hired by Josh. But those people need to be in the union, and Local 44 is a difficult one to crack. If anybody is interested in coming out and making a go of it for movie money, I would recommend coming with the greatest variety of skills that you can. Understand how to model an object in whatever it is you're using, Rhino, ZBrush, doesn't matter, and get an STL that can be output on a printer, because that's a huge part of my process. If I'm going to make a space gun, for example, we're going to start with drawings and illustrations, and we're going to drive those illustrations into a place where we think they're good, and we're going to show them to the director. And if the director says, yeah, I like the shape language here on this, and I like this over here and this over here, we'll take those 3, we'll put them into 1, we'll bring it back, and that's where the director, maybe she'll go, yeah, that's perfect, let's do that. The next step is, how big is it? We print it out on a plotter, and we put it onto foam core in 5 different scales, and we hold it. If it's a gun, put it up to your shoulder. Does my hand hit the grip right? Oh, there's no room for this hand up here, we'll have to move that over there. We make adjustments, we print it again, and then we take it back to the director. How big is this? Which of these 5 or 6 scales do you like? They'll point to one, and then we model it, and then we print it. Low res, we just print it out so that we can actually hold it as a 3D object now and not a piece of cardboard. Those skills in being able to model something and get it ready for output are hugely important. And every time we do a project, we lean more heavily into that process, because it's so expensive to make this stuff in time and materials, that if you get it wrong down pipeline, you've wasted a ton of money, but more importantly, time. So I like to make all my mistakes on cardboard and low-res PLA prints so that it's a quick recovery and there's no investment. And we can dial it in that way. And now when we're going to move forward, we know we've got the right piece. And it's all about, at that point, paint and finish. So coming with modeling skills, understanding 3D printing, that would be huge right now in today's sort of environment. but also knowing how to make a mold, knowing different materials to cast in. Maybe you have played around with Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and you know how to program LEDs that'll blink. If you understand addressable RGBW LED tape, that's even better, because a lot of our props, like on Kenobi, for example, we did lightsabers, right? And to have the lightsaber turn on, where it, and the lights go up the stick, you don't want to give that control to an actor, especially one that has to then go and fight with the thing. Because if you put buttons on the outside of this thing and they're in a combat mode with it, I mean, what do you think's going to happen? Their hand's going to move, they're going to hit the button, the light's going to go off. So instead we use what's called a DMX control. And it's addressable. Basically, we have a little radio receiver inside of there, and the person at the lighting board can control that then, so that they can turn the thing on as they would like to. They can do, they get local control and they get to hit the cues, so that when Obi-Wan raises the lightsaber and it's, there's somebody watching the video feed and they're doing that live for him. So Ewan doesn't have to worry about it. It just happens. Those types of electronic skills are also becoming more and more and more useful. I know that that's like all kinds of modern technology I'm talking about. The fundamentals of this stuff, though, is still sculpting, drawing. It's how light hits paint. It's an understanding of color. We specialize quite a bit more than, here's a model maker, they're going to do the whole thing. And this is just how it relates to props. I spoke earlier about models that directors use sort of as mock-ups. And in that world, it's more about, can you build fast? It doesn't have to be picture ready because it'll never be photographed, but it is as good of a reference as you can put together in a small scale. And those people are generally hired more by art directors than they are prop masters, because those generally deal more with what the look and feel of the set is going to be, as opposed to drilling down on specific props. But that's also wide open. Yeah, please jump in.
Oh, I actually thought I'd ask. We had a question from one of the
Oh,
audience
yeah,
members.
I'm sorry, please.
So they were asking if you know anything about the model making and prop making industry in Canada. It seemed as if you guys had some members maybe in the New York region, but I don't know if you had any
Yeah, there's
international.
I don't really, so back in the late 90s, early 2000s, mostly with Muppet projects, I would go up and we did some stuff in Vancouver and Toronto, and I would be pulled into the Muppet Workshop to do that because it was super hyper specific. But those places have really their own local crews that are pretty solid. We don't interface a lot. The Prop Masters Guild is an international guild. We have members in Europe. I'm trying to get my friend Melissa Spicer, who worked with me on Avatar, to join as well. So we are all around the world. I don't know so much about the sort of what the job market is in Vancouver or Toronto, but I have to imagine that it's very similar to what we do here. I don't know that the process really changes based on the geography of where it's happening. I think this is currently what filmmaking is sort of all about, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The Property Master Guild does have meetups, and they mentioned on the website. Some are in your area, Brad, and other ones are in Vancouver, BC.
Mm-hmm.
So
that makes good sense.
I wonder, since they publish it on a public website and they don't say you have to know the secret word or
oh no, you should go, show up,
you
say
can
hi.
show up.
Yeah.
And that's probably if the Canada question person is in Vancouver, that would be a start.
Yeah. I just pulled up the chat too. I'm sorry I missed that earlier.
Oh no, it's okay.
Okay.
Look, I just said hi. I understand technology and I can type really fast. But yeah, I would honestly, I'd recommend, like, if you're at all interested, go say hi to these folks and introduce yourself. Hey, I'm one of the folks from the APMM, and I just wanted to say hi and meet you guys. I mean, gate crash, see what happens. Sometimes it's much better. I've learned in my career, sometimes it's way better to ask forgiveness than permission.
I actually did have another question for you.
Please.
So I was curious, and I'm sure this depends greatly on the production, but I'm curious how much of what you folks do is going out to Home Depot and basically just grabbing something that looks interesting and just sticking a few things on it and repainting it a different color. Because I know that happens frequently, and there seems to be a crazy cult of fans of these things that just are obsessed with like sourcing every single thing that's seen on screen down to like the part number in a McMaster catalog, or
Yeah.
what line of clothier makes this certain jumpsuit that the Ghostbusters wore, and
Yeah.
just
No,
and
their cosplayers are, they just, every time I see a cosplayer replicating something that I've had a part of, it just makes me happy, because it just speaks to the passion that people have for what we put on screen. And I want to be really clear about this without being too verbose. I don't do anything important for a living. The best I can hope for is that a burnt out teacher or a nurse or a firefighter or a police officer, somebody that is doing real work, and that's not a complete list, but somebody that does real work that is taxing and exhausting, a social worker, that maybe they're just fried, but they're really looking forward to going to go see Avatar: The Way of the Water because they were a big fan and they've waited far too long, and they go to the movie, and during that time they're transported to Pandora, and they get a visual spectacle like nobody's ever seen before. And at the end of that, they come out almost tired, but those batteries get recharged. That's the best I can hope for, or when you come home and you kick your shoes off and you're like, I don't know, honey, what do you want to watch tonight? I'm pretty cooked. I don't know, let's throw on an episode of whatever. Let's watch Arrested Development, and some of my work shows up. And if it can help people who do the important work recharge their batteries a little bit, that's all I can ask, because even though it's a very stressful world that we inhabit, and the deadlines are the deadlines, and it's the stakes are high, we also really aren't the people doing anything important in the world. So I hope that work can sort of inspire, if nothing else. I'm sure
how
I didn't
much of
answer your
the
question there.
oh,
Oh, but
it's all
back to
good.
what you were saying. Found objects, Home Depot. Sorry. Yes. I love that. I was transported by Star Wars. Those people did that to me when I was a kid. And I love the found object of it. In fact, I don't know if you can see, but there's two boxes right there. One of them on top is a lightsaber that I made when I was in my early 20s for a costume party. And it actually is a terrible lightsaber, but we had a character on Kenobi named Haja who is a fake Jedi, and a fake Jedi needs a fake lightsaber. And so I gave my team actually the same restrictions I had with that. I said, I want you to go to a hardware store. I'm going to give you $75. I want you to buy parts, and I want you to build a lightsaber that's not that good. And the team that I had, these are all professional model maker and prop maker folks, and they here's their shot at building a lightsaber that's going to be used on camera, and they're just like, oh, and they all were too good, but whatever. I put them all out in front of the director, and she chose my crappy one. That was all done from a hardware store in Half Moon Bay, California. Underneath it is a Graflex flash handle, which for those who are in the know is what Luke Skywalker's lightsaber was built from.
Yeah.
And so when I'm doing a project like Kenobi, I'm leaning really hard into that found object aesthetic, because that is the aesthetic of the project. That's the aesthetic of Star Wars. So we worked very hard to buy pieces and put them together, like you're talking about, not necessarily from Home Depot, but from around the internet. Kenobi's blaster was one that I designed, and that was an old 1930s competition air pistol, which just looked funky, with some parts cobbled together from some old camera flash equipment for a scope, to a muzzle brake that was part of a propane torch tip, and even another little piece that was this little brass whistle that my kids got as like something from a birthday party, and they just walked around blowing it, and it was just like driving me crazy. So I'm like, you know what, that looks like it could be on the end of this. So I chopped it in half and stuck it on the front of that. So There's a perfect example of found object. When we move into something like Rebel Moon, where we're establishing a different world of science fiction, we can do less of that. But I still do like to find the weird and obscure and interesting and put that on camera. There's a tool that a character uses in Rebel Moon, and has that, if you've ever been wrenching on a car and you have that little moment where the bolt slips or the tool slips off the bolt and you kind of wrap your knuckles against something and get a little bloody. There was a tool that was something I found at a yard sale that for $3 I picked this up, and it was like this weird, the old drills that you'd put against your chest or you'd hold and you'd do that with. It was an extension for one of those that could take your tip and give you an angle adjustment, and it would take the motion and it would adjust from straight to 45 degrees so that you could put a 45-degree bend on the end of one of those drills. That thing had a really cool look. It looked like a tool. It looked like it, because it obviously had really good, honest age on it. That's where I went and didn't alter that much and used that as it was. So it's a really budget efficient way to make things if you can find an obscure object that nobody's really seen or will recognize. I just think that's getting harder and harder to do as more people become so much more internet savvy, and prop masters like me keep throwing this stuff out there. We're running out of things that people don't know about yet. So, but I am a huge fan of found objects. Absolutely.
Has anyone in you or another person in your organization become kind of like a teacher mentor? We had a question about, well, how do I learn this stuff? Because there aren't that many model making schools. So has anyone kind of set up some kind of education program?
Not that I know of.
YouTube videos or something like that? No?
Honestly, most people, and Terry Fisher's got a question. Most people that do this, whether they're going to be doing it for a living or not. Most of the people that I will hire onto these crews or that work in these shops, they figured it out. They went on YouTube to learn the tutorials. Certainly, I'm sure there are classes in 3D modeling. Buy yourself a cheap 3D printer and don't be afraid to break it, but learn how to use it. They're all a little finicky and they get better and better every year. But most of the folks that do this for a living did this as a kid or do it as a hobby, and they come to us with a skill set already done. There may be schools like this. I think Legacy, which is Stan Winston's old shop, I think they do some coursework, they do some classes, but I think all of these, YouTube is just the most amazing tutorial. If I don't know how to do something, I go on YouTube and I'm like, oh, okay, that's how I reprogram my sprinkler system outside. Or, that's the best glue to use when my shoe breaks. It maybe it's not the most important to know everything, but to know how to get the education. I hope that answers that question.
Adam Savage's tested show sometimes has model making in it, and he did a thing on how to add greebles to a model so it looks like more than just 8 pieces of styrene glued together, but it's actually a functioning device in the real world.
Yeah. There is even one of my assistants on Kenobi who is a hobbyist. He had made a bunch of space tools for I don't even know what, just to do it. He was just working in his garage and playing around, and we needed space tools, and he brought them in and he said, how about these? And I'm like, you know what, those are great, we're going to use them. And so those become Star Wars canon. I think it's important to do it first and then try to do it professionally. Just
I
be
honestly
careful.
think basically what
ahead.
you said is kind of like the iconic way that almost everybody I know that's gotten into any kind of model making or any tangent field, they would be doing it whether they were getting paid for it or not. I think you summed that up very nicely. So
Yeah.
sorry to
Terry Fisher asked what the holy grail of movie props is. And oh my goodness, what a big question. That'll probably change every day that I would answer this question. But as far as movie props, one of the things the PMG is doing is we're coming up with our own internal awards show, because we want to celebrate and recognize our own excellence so that we can tell that to our directors, producers, and production designers, and hopefully get paid more.
Hmm.
We talk about the MacGuffin. I don't know if you know that term, but it's the name for a prop that moves the story along. Um, the one of the greatest movie props, I don't even know. It's such a hard one. This T16 that's sitting next to me is a pretty special piece, and so I guess maybe today it's that because it's iconic from my own childhood, and I got to help resurrect it and build it as perfectly as I could build it, and it made it to set, and then somehow made it back to my house. I think that's the answer today, Terry. I hope that works out for you.
Well, they just found Gene Roddenberry's Starship Enterprise model that
Oh,
was used
wow.
in the first credits before they made a better one.
Mhm.
They had a 3 foot long wooden model, and he loaned it to the Next Generation production or one of the movies productions to use as a tabletop ornament
Okay.
in another starship, and they never gave it back, and it disappeared for 30 years or something like that.
Wow.
And someone was just trying to sell it on eBay for $1,000, and then it got taken down suddenly.
Yeah.
So in the short time it was up, people were analyzing it, saying, "Yep, those are the decals, and even the wooden base it was attached to matches the wood grain of what we expected it to be." And all these details that they just grabbed off of the eBay listing
Hmm.
while it was up for a super short time, and now the search is on to find this little prankster that's had it, and say, "Yeah, $1,000." If you had come by that legitimately, yeah,
You could do better than 1,000.
you do a
If
little
we all
better.
chip in, maybe we could pull that together and we could just rotate it. It could be your house for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
we have 5 minutes left, and I wanted to just ask you a little bit about the Property Masters Guild itself and how you do things, because I think you have things to teach us, and we might have things to teach you, and we can talk about more
we're
detail.
pretty new. We don't,
Yeah.
the guild was kind of formed as an idea before it really had functionality. And I joined primarily because I'm interested in doing an award show. Every guild that exists, whether it's stunts or the Art Directors Guild or the Set Directors Association or cinematographers, DGA, all of these, every craft has a guild except props. And I think one of the things that I was talking with some of these old timers yesterday and the day before about were that props is sort of we're like a bastard stepchild sometimes, or at least it feels that way. So for example, if it's time to bring a prop out to set and something goes sideways with it, and we call over the radio and I'm saying, "I'm so sorry, we just had a little bit of a problem. I need another 5 minutes." That's not going to go real great. And after about 35 seconds, they're going to say, "Is it ready yet?" Whereas if the director of photography, as they're doing lighting, says, "We just need another 5 minutes and we're done," the first AD is like, "Oh, great, just 5 more minutes." So one of the things that we want to do is just create awareness and elevate that amongst our peers. And so that's why I'm interested in the award show, is to point out to people like, yeah, not only are we good at what we do and that we do so many different things, but that we deserve recognition. The other thing we're doing is creating community, which is, I'm sure, what the APMM does. Is these little get-togethers and meetups are important because there's usually only one prop master on a show. And I don't personally go and like hang out at the clubhouse too much, because when I'm not working, I've got a family life and I want to create some work-life balance. So the guild is I think right now, and I'm not a board member, I don't want to speak for the entire guild, but what I see the value in the PMG is in building this community and building this awareness of our craft and putting that forward, and also being able to help, and this is very important, to help the people who are coming up know how to put together a budget if they don't, how to break down a script if they don't, what is the value of their kit rental, what is the value of a trailer rental, and what should they be asking, so that we can all get together on the same page, so that nobody is inadvertently undercutting somebody else, nobody is inadvertently asking for way too much money, so that, well, no, everybody should ask for way too much money, but that is where I see the value in the PMG, is in community, in awareness, and in education. That's and I, maybe that's the same thing that you guys are looking at as well. It's just
lot of parallels for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, I would hope so.
Even to the point of like, there may not only be one model maker in a model shop, but we're definitely a siloed profession. Most model shops are not that big, and a lot of
Yeah,
model shops may only have one or two
yeah.
people,
Well, and like some of the guys that worked on my internal shop for Team America World Police, they got together and they came from a world of architectural models, which I know is a huge part of what you guys do.
Yep.
And one of them worked for Frank Gehry for a while. So before they put up the Disney Hall, they take his crumpled up piece of tinfoil and they figure out how that's going to be a building, and they extensively model that stuff, because even if it's not for a finished purpose, it is definitely informative along the way, much like the process I was talking about when we come up with a space gun.
Very cool.
Ooh, the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues. Yeah, that's a good one. If we're adding ships and boats and things, I have to say that my holy grail would be the Millennium Falcon. No question. Greatest spaceship of all time. I apologize to all the Star Trek fans that are out there. I'm an Enterprise E guy a little bit, but I have to say the Falcon is just such a cool ship. And if you know the history of that, it's a really interesting thing. When McGuire first drew it, it has the cockpit off to the right, which is entirely impractical. Like, how do you see what's to the left, right? There's no way. So the Falcon actually was meant to fly like this, with the cockpit on top. And it was only after Lucas saw it and was like, well, what if we lay it down like this, that it became the iconic ship that it is now. Someday I hope to build the D'Agostini model of that. Do you know that model? It was like a model of the month, that the club that they put out. This company in London put out what they call the studio scale Millennium Falcon. That's all pre-painted, and you would pay you would get an installment of this model kit every week. Actually, they bundled it. Would send you the 4 every month, with a magazine with information and the instructions on what you're supposed to do with those parts. And it's right out of the box, put it together, it's painted, you're good to go. Or you can go way down the rabbit hole where people did all kinds of custom mods and they did all kinds of custom paint and all of it. And I was stupid enough to go ahead and buy that thing. And it's been sitting in a closet for probably like 5 or 6 years, just waiting for me to have a little spare time to get into it. But yeah, the Falcon's the shit.
It's a fantastic looking ship. Definitely.
Yeah. I heard the story about someone biting a hamburger when they were talking about making spaceships, and they were saying, it has to look weird. We want this to be a whole nother universe of stuff.
Yeah.
And they were talking about rockets, and someone said, no, like this. And he bit his hamburger and put it on a plate and said, a round, not a flying saucer, but a round ship that's asymmetric and stuff like that. That was the first concept, I guess.
That's awesome. Yeah, and those little birthday candles, right? Where you light them and then the thing burns down and it opens up and it plays this little horrible music and it spins around and it's like a flower or something like that. I had one of those for my birthday, and to get the thing to shut up, I ripped out the sound chip portion, and I'm like, that's a really interesting shape. And it's like this big. But on Rebel Moon, I used that as the design language for a data pad, for something much larger that's handheld, that had something that became a sci-fi prop out of that shape language. It's finding things that are manufactured, I guess, back to your point, and either scaling up, scaling down, like those kinds of shapes, because it always comes down to shape, and then it comes down to size and finish and functionality. It's great to find those objects that when you tweak the scale or do something different with, they become a completely new thing. So I'm all about, looking at the leftovers on your plate and seeing what spaceships you can come out of, seeing what spaceships you can get out of them.
I imagine prop people very quickly develop a headspace for that, where you almost like look at things in ways that other people don't, because you're always
Yeah.
considering what could that thing be.
Yeah, it's one of the things you don't turn off, you know. I love going to antique shops, and I love going to flea markets, and I love going
Oh, yeah.
to all those places. Even if I don't have any money to spend, I still like looking around, and still like just exploring shape, language, and form factor and finish. And I can close with a story about finish. I built a droid on Kenobi that's not this guy back here, but another R2 unit, R2B3. He has, I think he's in Wikipedia even now because he got to be canon. But my idea behind building this droid is like, how beat up, how terrible can a droid be? And you would still bother to plug it in and give it power. Like, you know, so I built a droid with a dented dome, and I literally dented it, and it's all rusted, and the paint is faded, and it's chipped. Ewan McGregor used to drive this original Patina 1971 VW Bug. He's a VW guy, and he had a 71 Bug that had been in California for a long time, and the sun just ate through the paint, and it was probably on the west side near the ocean because there's little pitted rust marks all over it. He dialed the thing in mechanically so that it's perfect, and the interior is brand new. But the original patina of the outside was just so honest as far as its paint and its rust that I used a lot of photographs of his car to match or to paint the droid. And I'm going to try to come up with a picture really fast for you that I can show you. It's a really, I don't know, it was just great. I like taking examples from the real world so that we don't have to fake it. Let's see if I can find this picture. Sorry.
Now, is this droid actually in the show Kenobi at some point?
Yeah, he's in episode 5 and 6, and he's pretty much background. He doesn't do much, but let me see here. Here's some pictures. I'm sorry, this is taking a minute.
No, it's okay. We're keeping you after time, so appreciate it.
So here, for example, that's
Oh, yeah.
Ewan McGregor's original Patina VW, right? And that rust and that paint fading and all of that amazing, like how it goes white to the primer is well, personally, my aesthetic calls that beautiful because it shows its age and it's just super cool. And so when I was working on the droid, I used that as in, sorry, I'm going to try to hold this still. I'm really shaky.
No, it's perfect.
But I used that as inspiration, if that makes sense.
That's fantastic.
So that you know, it's honest paint. It looks like it should, and we don't have to extrapolate that. We use real world examples. And my kids love that right next to the TV is R2B3 hanging out there in our living room.
That was one quick question I wanted to ask before we close it up, was just how much of this stuff ends up going home with prop makers or prop masters or whatever. Clearly
Very
you got a
little.
few. I see one
Well,
behind you there, but
yeah, I mean, there isn't much. Like, so, you know, the lightsaber I talked about, that I made, so I own that. The one down below, oh my gosh, I should be better at this. I'm a puppeteer. Here is one that's just a Graflex slash handle that's never been screen used. These three lightsabers here are 1, 2, and 3. Those are the sabers that all represent the same one from Kenobi. The top one I bought as reference as I got the job because I'm like, I have to understand in the storyline. Episode 3, he's got this lightsaber at the end of episode 3, and episode 4, Alec Guinness has this lightsaber. They're supposed to be the same one, but they look completely different. And so I had to understand how to bridge them in the middle. What form factor am I going to keep? What am I not going to keep? This is not screen used, but it was made as a sort of an executive gift, because at the end of Kenobi, everybody gives each other presents that they didn't make. And the executive producer director gave me one of these. So that's why I have that. Some of these Muppet props were gifts again, but this stuff isn't ours. I work for them. I make it for them, and they end up with it. Sometimes, you know, somebody will say, Brad, you did such an amazing job. Thank you so much. Would you like this? You know, would you like to take this home? Or my crew will make an extra as a gift for me as well. But for the most part, this stuff all belongs to them. And it's a very dangerous thing if you want to, you know, if one of those wants to fall off the truck and come home with you, because you know, for whatever it's worth to have in your house, it's not worth jeopardizing your career.
Sure.
You know?
One of the main
I would
reasons
like
I
to have more
asked
toys.
was just because that was it Greg? Is it Greg Jean? I can't remember. Bruce, do you remember the guy's name? The old model maker that
Gene
died
Rosardi?
recently? No,
Gene
his
Rosardi?
last name was Jean, Jein. It was the guy who passed away
Oh, yeah.
recently, and his collection that had the X-wing in it, the Red Leader
Yeah.
X-wing. I mean, he had a movie prop collection that included all sorts of, like, you know, Captain Kirk's one of his original outfits, and, you know, one of the 2 screen used Red Leader X-wings from the original
I know,
movie. Just
amazing.
lots of, just an
I
amazing
think times
collection.
have changed. I think
Probably.
asset inventories and that kind of things have tightened up quite a bit since the mid to late 70s. You know, I think it probably was, maybe it's the same thing where a director says, hey, amazing job, I want you to have this X-Wing to take home forever. But much like why that model of the Enterprise was probably taken down so fast, is that it's possible that that person's not allowed to have that,
Yeah.
and that just went home with them. And so that's important stuff these days.
Sure.
You know, back then it was probably a little bit more cowboy, and the movie
Wild
zone was
West
like,
for sure.
whatever, Star Wars, nobody's gonna watch this, take the thing, I don't care.
Right.
Except for everyone took all the graphics handles off of cameras, I guess, when they saw the lightsaber and they knew what it was. They
Yeah,
said studios were, all of our handles have been unscrewed from this lighting equipment.
all the prop houses.
What the
Yeah.
hell? And everyone's
No,
going,
it's true.
it's a lightsaber.
And I can tell you, if you find one of those Graflex flash handles, there's a company making repops of those right now. In fact, they even bought the Graflex name so that they could make reproductions of this flash handle. And you can buy those for, I don't know, a couple $100 maybe. I don't know what they charge. But if you find an original, the purists that want to recreate that prop for themselves, they are going to want an original Graflex flash handle. And I bought that at a flea market when I was probably 15, because I recognized it, knew what it was, and picked it up for $15 or something ridiculous like that. Now, if you find an original flash handle, a 3-cell Graflex flash handle, which is what that's called, in good condition, you're probably looking at $700 to $1,000, depending on the day and depending on who's selling it. So, yeah, it's again one of those great things that I hope in my career that I create a run on some obscure camera part or something stupid like that, because people want to recreate the props that I was fortunate enough to be able to design and manufacture and put on screen.
So one skill that you shared was be a scrounger of antique shops. We have I've seen the chain of like surplus shops, Wacky Willie's or Axeman or whatever. You go into those stores, it's all like industrial overruns and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, I know because I've been to 2 different ones in 2 different cities, and if you wanted to make like a robot out of basic parts, oh, here's a big dome, and here's some tubes, and here's a gear and whatever, and you just go and find that stuff.
Yep, I love it. In fact, the lamp on my desk here, I'm going to flip this around without showing too much bad stuff. You see that lamp okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's all made out of vacuum cleaner parts. That's the base is an old canister vacuum, and it's got the chrome tube, and it's got the, you know, the light bulb obviously isn't that, but I love that aesthetic. I think it's amazing. I think it's a lot of
Very
fun.
cool.
So
All right, Brad, we've been super generous with your time.
Yeah.
We should probably let you go because clearly I think we could keep you talking all afternoon.
I'd be happy to. You know,
Well,
I do have to go because my kids are at home from school because of the holiday.
yeah.
Modern models, once the props designed, tested, and confirmed, where is it sent to be built? It depends on the shop, but my top 3 would be Studio Art and Technology, it would be Hand Prop Room, and it would be Thingergy. And those are the top three. But also, you know, I go as far as to New Zealand for Weta Workshop because they have a lot of talent. So, and if you guys have any other questions or anything else that come along, you know, I'm accessible, and I have a couple commercials coming up. But thank goodness the SAG strike is over, so that hopefully I'll be getting on to the next big ass cool movie. But you know, until then, please reach out. I want to make sure that the PMG is a friend to the APMM. And if you do, in your wherever you guys are, if you do see that there is a PMG event and you want to go and just say hello, you know, let's share and spread community, and I don't think anything bad can come of it. So
For sure.
thank you so much for having me today. I hope this was I hope you got out of it what you were looking for.
No, it was
Oh,
fantastic.
more than
Thank
we
you.
thought we would. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, you guys have a great weekend, and I'm gonna go get some kids some lunch and then get ready for my D&D game that I'm hosting tonight.
Huh? Oh, we could have a whole nother conversation about that. I'll have to talk to you later about D&D.
Sure. Well,
Have
we'll
fun.
Cheers,
Have
guys.
fun.
Job,
Thank you so
Hunt.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So long.
And for everyone else that's still here, thank you all for joining. We're planning on doing a December meetup. It'll probably be like last year where we did kind of just a chill, you know, event in the evening someday, you know, toward the end of the year, you know, mid to late December. We can all just kind of hang out, have a drink, and just chat about, you know, whatever comes up. That went pretty well last time. You know, I think people stuck around for a few hours or whatever, and it was quite a bit of fun. So we'll probably just plan on doing that to close the year out for the meetup events. Again, I want to thank you all for spending your time with us today, and I'll let you get back to work and back to your afternoon, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.